All right. Ellen Archer has recorded over 175 audiobooks. She has won the coveted Audie Award for her recording of For the Love of a Dog, and was an Audie Awards finalist for Testimony by Anita Shreve, okay, and for Room by, Emma Donahue, I believe that's pronounced that way. She has also won multiple audiophile earphone awards, Publishers Weekly, and Listen Up Awards. Her work spans both fiction and nonfiction, romance, children's, YA, fantasy, and science fiction. Ellen has recorded over 300 national network television and radio commercials, is an actor and a classically trained singer, and with a degree in opera from the Boston Conservatory. And she will hit a high C later, but no. She lives with her husband, son, dog, cat, 2 snails, and a fish in their 2 small apartment in New York City. Ellen Archer, ladies and gentlemen.
So we're really glad to have Ellen here with us today. Mike and I can speak as producers until we are blue in the face, which takes us a lot less long to get there than you guys because you guys have all the breath control and everything. But I'm glad to have Ellen here so she can speak from the actor's perspective and talk a little bit more about what it means to translate from stage or screen into just audio. So, finding your voice, knowing your voice, is something that's really important because it's going to determine the material that you are going out for, that you are going to audition for. There may be genres out there that you love that maybe you're just not suited for. Maybe it's better if you stick to reading them to yourself and not out loud. Conversely, there are going to be things out there that you are really, really great at reading and you find a little dry. If you are awesome at those kinds of things, and if you are wanting to work, those are the perfect things for you to be going out for. So how do you figure out your voice? How do you find your voice? How do you know what you should be auditioning for? Any ideas? Anybody that wasn't rhetorical? No? I heard a cell phone buzz. That's all I get. Thank you.
Well, I end up getting,
that helps.
it's like I do a lot of self-help. I don't like self-help, but that's the jobs I seem to get.
Right.
Okay. What else?
I was going to say, audio-wise, it's kind of like Jack Pogee's book on monologues, which is a staple that's been out there for a couple of decades. If you get a group of people together who are your friends, or 5 or 6 people, for the acting thing, you have them do like little ballots. What roles do they see you playing? Housewife, nurse, blah blah, lawyer, doctor, and there'll be a consensus of those 5 or 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing you could try vocally, and say, what do you hear when you hear my voice? And that's a way of getting outside yourself and getting the feedback that may clue you into characters and genres you should play that you may not have thought of yourself.
Right. Good. What else? Anybody else have any ideas?
Not so much ideas, but that's kind of, I don't feel like I'm quite there yet. I know whenever I hear myself read, whenever I hear myself read or whatever, it sounds like I'm an announcer or something, and it doesn't sound natural. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a way to set the voice that makes me sound natural.
Well, it sounds like you're taking the right first step, which is listening to yourself, which is so important to know how you sound because, as we all know, we sound different in our own heads as we do in someone else's head when they are listening to us. The thing that sort of goes along with that would be listen to other narrators who are out there. Listen to people who maybe you think sound similar to you. Listen to people in the genres that you like. Listen to how they're doing it and see if that fits with your voice, if that's completely different from your voice. See how it measures up. Read the listener comments. Our listeners are extremely loyal at Audible. They will come back. They will tell us what they have thought. Take it with a grain of salt, by the way. If somebody comes back and says, I hate this person, I'm never going to listen to them again, they probably just were having a bad day. But do pay attention when they say, I love this narrator, or I love you, I love your voice. So pay attention to things like that and really know how you sound. I feel like I saw another hand of somebody who was like really tentative and then put their hand down.
Well, one thing I've done is I'm a retired naval officer, so I look for nonfiction military because I can get into that mindset very easily and I think bring appropriate pathos to it. And I've also been a business consultant for a number of years, so a lot of that genre because I have a passion around, people saying, I am so excited to be here. Well, tell your voice, and, reading it in a non-stoic way.
Right, and it's great to think about things that you have a background in and things that you're passionate about. So just make sure that you're right for those things and go from there. So Ellen, do you want to talk a little bit about how you found your voice as an audiobook narrator?
Sure. Thank you.
In stereo.
Yes, exactly. I actually started out, as Mike said, as an opera singer, and I was also an actor. I did a lot of musical theater and a lot of straight theater. And I knew my voice very well as a singer and as an actor. And I actually sort of fell into audiobooks, actually. I was going to go meet a friend for drinks, and they used to do these, gatherings, I guess, for audiobook publishers, and you'd pay $10, and they'd hand you a script, and you'd draw a name from a hat, and they'd let you, do you remember these days? They'd let you send in an audition to somebody who could actually get you a job. Really, it was a lot of actors also just telling you if they thought you were any good or not, and they were very mean about it. But anyway, I booked my very first job with the BBC, and I had a producer, a director, and an engineer. And my first book was a Candace Bushnell, the woman who wrote Sex and the City. It was a 17-hour book with 62 characters. And I'd never done a book before, but I had been an actor for so long, and I loved reading books out loud. This may date me, but I remember I used to have a cassette player, the thing that had the record button on it. I used to record The Shadow Knows when I was, 9 years old. So I knew already that intrinsic to storytelling was being invested in the story. That's the number one thing. Acting is really the only thing you should be worrying about, not your voice. I'm sure a lot of you have been told you have great voices, and everyone's like, oh, you should be doing commercials, or you should be doing that. That's really irrelevant. It's nice to have a nice voice. You won't work if you have a horrible voice. You won't work if you've got vocal tics, or you'll spend 5 million hours editing out weird stuff that your voice is doing. But just let's assume that you have decent voices. What it's about is telling a story, whether it's military fiction, a nonfiction, whether it's a self-help book. I've done a lot of those too. Whether it's books that you think are terribly written and really stupid. Your job is not to judge anything that lands on your desk. Your job is to fall in love. Just like when you're an actor, I've played a lot of really horrible roles that I didn't really like, but I fell in love with that character. I fell in love with my leading man, even if he had bad breath and looked disgusting and it was a slimy person. I was in love with him on stage, and sometimes I had a little problem just, making the delineation off stage. But now that I'm married, I'm so much better than that. Anyway, but it's this, I carry that same mentality into my audiobooks. So I won't lie, sometimes Mike will send me something and or another publisher, Random House or whatever, will say, this isn't maybe, it's a big seller, it's maybe not the best story, and I might have a moment where I judge it. And then I just put that aside and I find something very valuable about it, which is telling the story. So I would say finding your voice, when you talk about that, is about how there are going to be stories that are easier for you to tell. You were saying about the military fiction. There's going to be stories that are challenging for you to tell. I'm getting the feeling, I don't do ACX, but I'm getting the feeling that there's just a lot of opportunities. You shouldn't be submitting yourself for stuff that isn't easy for you to tell, because the listener's going to hear that. And as a listener, you don't want to be pulled out of the story. You don't want to be pulled out of the story by you trying to do a Southern accent when you're from New York. If you don't know how to do a Southern accent, don't do it. If you can't nail it, if you can't be 100% committed to the book, 100% committed to the characters, it's not right for you. Set it aside for a time when you've had more coaching, you've got more titles under your belt. And that's one thing I would say, along with figuring out what your type is. I don't know, I get the feeling not all of you live in New York, but if you do, you should be taking a class. You should be taking coachings, period. You are alone in an audio booth doing this on your own. I had many, many books under my belt before I worked alone. I only had a booth by myself for, I think, about 1.5 years, but by that time I already had dozens of titles under my belt. It's very difficult to do what you're doing in a vacuum with yourself as your own editor, your own coach, your own person telling you how good you are. I don't know if I get the idea of asking other people to give you feedback, but I would like those people to give you feedback who actually know what they're talking about. Not your mother or your second cousin who listens to audiobooks, on her cheap CD player. There really is no excuse for not taking a coaching if you're in New York. If you're an LA person, or even if you can do coachings by Skype. There's plenty of people that do it. And I'm sure these guys know people. I happen to know some people that could do it too. I coach too, but I'm not plugging myself. I also think it's good to coach with people who could get you a job. There are some people that are casting directors that coach. Those are really good people to take coachings with. And they can give you feedback. So aside from having a coaching, I would say you should judge by how easy it is to tell the story. If you're having to work so hard in the booth that you're floundering, that is not the book for you. And after a point, just doing the books to make money and to ratchet up how many titles you've done, and if they suck, you're not doing yourself any favors. So let those books go that don't fit right. And the other thing I would say is that it's very good to be versatile, but you don't have to be. There are some people that aren't that versatile that do one thing very well, and they knock it out of the park. And that's very valuable. But I happen to be very versatile, and but I also, we were talking about this earlier about having some humility about it. I'm sure that a lot of you sitting in this room think you're really excellent at something, and I don't doubt that it's true. But a little bit of humility goes a long way. So even if you're sitting here in your booth going, I can rock that accent from Cornwall, or I am the most amazing person to tell this children's story, chances are you could use a coaching. Or you could, you know what I mean? Or you could go on to How'd You Say, or there's an IDA website. I use it all the time. I have done a lot of books. When I just did a book for Mike, actually, that was set in the UK. I did the whole book with an English accent, plus I had to have accents from Cornwall. That's why that popped in my head, which is a very weird sort of piratey accent, which I had to learn. I watched the entire 6 seasons of Doc Martin on Netflix, which is very good, by the way, but to get it in my ear. And that's how I work, because it's forever. Once you put that CD out, that's, like Mike was saying about your calling card, anybody could put a little click on it and hear you. And if you do a shitty job, that's there. And they may not listen again to anything else that you do. So for me, my work never stops. I'm always learning. Every time I get a title, I'm working as I did the first time I was in the studio. It's just that hard. And I think, even for the stuff that comes, like I have done a lot of romance, and I do a lot of, as time went on, I kind of uncovered what was the easiest for me to grab onto. You know how that happens sometimes, like you read a book and it just grabs you instantly. And I can just say that for me, a lot of that is when it's a first person, either fiction or nonfiction, where it's a very emotional story. Those I do very well for some reason. And I happen to think the reason I do them well is because I'm very, very committed. And Kat and I were talking about this the other day, is that when you're doing fiction and nonfiction, it isn't you telling the story. It doesn't matter if it's a self-help book. You have to be invested as a character to whom every single word is extraordinarily important. I did a book called Women Who Love Too Much. And I came out of that recording thinking I was seriously codependent. And I had a lot to tell everybody about how to live their lives. And but that wasn't me telling that story, And on the other hand, I did an amazing book called The Orchard by Teresa Ware, which is this phenomenal book. It was a memoir. She wrote it so incredibly beautiful that I called her to try to talk to her about what happened to us. What happened to your son? She's like, well, and my Tommy Hamron was like, we don't know her, right? We did just record, we're not personal friends with her, but that's how it feels that's the feeling that you should have. You shouldn't just be doing the book and knocking it off your list of things to do. Every time you're in that studio, you should be getting lost. And I know it's tough because you're editing yourself and you're also supposed to be producing it. But believe me, it is, with all the other stuff that you're learning, it's better to do fewer titles in my opinion, and spend more time getting this piece, the acting piece, under your belt than it is to just mask the titles. And I'll tell you something else. If you get the acting piece together, you won't believe how much more you like doing this. You were saying you don't like self-help books. I bet if I had a conversation with you and you had some coachings and you took what I'm saying to heart and you got invested, you searched to try to find out what it would be like to really need this information, and you told the story not as yourself, but as a character, using your voice, of course, you won't believe how quick it goes and how rewarding that is to do a job well done and to be invested in it. It really does make a huge difference. That was a very long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you, Ellen. No, I think you definitely touched on a number of important points. One of which is when you are reading a nonfiction book, you are still a character. There is still a point of view. So it is not Ellen Archer saying, hey, you're a woman who loves too much. It is the author who has a viewpoint and who has put all of this time and energy into this book, and you are personifying that. That is who you are becoming when you step into the booth. Let's talk a little bit more about becoming someone else in terms of accents. How many of you guys have like one really killer accent? Okay, so here's the really interesting difference between when we do this at universities and when we do it for slightly older professionals. When we do it at a university, every single person's hand shoots up. Everybody can do an RP accent. Everybody's got, like, I've got this aunt from Australia, and I can really imitate her. Probably for the purposes of being at home and entertaining your family at Christmas dinner. You guys really seem to, as a group, know that you need to be extremely confident and extremely authentic in an accent. And I can't remember the last time it seemed like there was a group who knew themselves so much. If you are doing an accent that is poor to middling, listeners will know. They will be able to tell. We never hire people for books that need to be told with an accent unless they are native speakers, because somewhere in there you are going to slip up. Or you're Ellen Archer, and for some reason we hire you to do all these books in a British accent. Which, from the time I started at Audible, Ellen has always been doing books in a British accent. And she's just really good. That's why we have her here today.
I wasn't always good at it, though. You can read the reviews. They were.
No, those people were just having a bad day, like I said before. But unless you are really confident in something, unless you are quite sure that it sounds authentic and you're not sounding like you are just maybe imitating somebody you heard in a movie, don't put it out there, or maybe get some training. If it's an accent that you love or that you feel is going to be really useful to you, seek out some training and some help with that and make sure that you get it really down pat and then use the heck out of it.
Just to keep in mind, subtlety goes a long way. So you don't have to go over the top with these accents. I was just speaking to someone about that. You don't want to sound cartoony like we were saying, but even if you do them well, like Ellen, there's a subtlety involved. It's not this hard trying to sound over the top with the accent or anything else. So subtlety goes a long way. And even if you don't do accents, there's many, many top narrators. Like Scott Brick comes to mind. I mean, he doesn't always do accents, even in a book, a fiction book, but he inflects and he does these subtle little things, shifts with his voice, where you know exactly who's speaking. That's a skill. That's a real skill, and that's something if you're good at it and you want to cultivate it, you'll work. I mean, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say that just to second that I think if you're choosing too many characters, just like if you had, like I had 62 characters and you feel like you have to make them really different, it can also take the listener out. Because the character has to really match. That's why what Scott's technique, and I try to use that technique too, works better. It's better to have it subtle because it's often very hard to keep track, first of all, of everybody that you're doing, but also it's very distracting as a listener. And sometimes what happens with narrators too, I feel like when they have that many, they run out of ideas, so they start to make really weird voices. Like to try to tell you that it's like, if it's 5 middle-aged guys in a room talking, they're like, well, they can't all sound alike. So one guy's gonna have this voice, the other one's gonna be like, it's like people don't, like average 5 people don't talk like that. So, it's like, it's just better to do it with tempo or with changing your register slightly. And also just maybe pausing a little bit so sometimes it won't always say, and Joe said or whatever, but you're better off, as Mike was saying, I think, doing less is more, because your goal is not to take the reader out of the story. It will drive them bananas if you're overdoing it.
All right, we've been at this for almost a half hour and we haven't moved past the first slide.
Oh, Lord, sorry, that's
Let's fly through these, shall we?
Okay, so seek professional training. I feel like we've already covered this. So there's no more to say. No, I'm kidding. There are a lot of classes out there. How many of you guys are based in New York or LA? A lot. Okay. Anybody from anywhere really wacky? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, well, it's Vermont. I'm English, but I think Vermont's kind of wacky.
For all good reasons.
Let's rephrase. How about not in a major market? Okay, there we go. Not in a major market.
Okay. So there are, like Ellen mentioned, there are people out there who will do sessions with you via Skype. There are, things you can watch online, but definitely go online and seek out people. If you are willing to pay someone for lessons, they're generally very willing to work with you, no matter where you are. It's extremely, extremely valuable, even if you wind up, traveling somewhere and maybe you take an intensive with somebody for a day. But just look for the people. They're out there. They want to help you. This is a really nice industry. Like, I haven't met most of you, but those of you who I have met are just really nice. And I think that's one of the best things about this. But people want you to succeed. They want you to do well. And people have a lot to say and a lot of knowledge to share. So take advantage of that. It's one of the best parts of the industry, especially in terms of acting.
And we can recommend folks, no matter what market you live in, so email us.
Yeah, all nice people, too. So performing in top categories. I'm going to stand for this one because this part's a little ACX-centric. We wanted to talk to you guys about what the top categories are out there on ACX, because there is the most work available, and you're going to be doing the most auditions for work in these categories. Mysteries and thrillers. How many of you guys are auditioning for stuff like this already? Okay, I saw one maybe. A nice mix of male and female narrators, which is awesome. So there's a lot of it out there. People love listening to this stuff because it makes the time go by really quickly and you get super invested in the story. So mysteries and thrillers, great area to focus if you feel like that's a strength for you. Romance and erotica. Okay, people already raised their hands before I even asked. Good for you guys. That's awesome. Anybody else want to share that they're auditioning for this stuff? And we don't have to talk about the dinosaur books. It's totally fine. There is a ton of it out there, again, because people love listening to it because it takes them away from where they are. Last year, we did a really fun session on romance, erotica, and new adult, just talking about the differences among those three categories. Romance tends to be far more story-driven. Erotica tends to not have so much of a story. And new adult deals with sort of the emotional development of characters through a romantic or erotic story. So all of those genres are out there. New adult was very up and coming last year when we did our session, so it was fun to talk about and to educate people about it. I feel like it's a little more known. But again, there is so much of it out there.
But that's not a separate genre on ACX, new adult.
It's not, but I think a lot of people talk about it kind of as another genre. I like to talk about it that way because it's an easy way to differentiate for you to know, what am I getting into here? And I also think if you're looking to audition for stuff like this and there's a line that you feel like you're drawing, I think it's totally fine to ask your rights holder, where would you put this kind of on this spectrum so you can know if you're comfortable with it or not? Does anybody have any questions about this one? I feel like it can be a fun category if people want to talk about it or have questions. This guy certainly has a question.
I think what we're talking about here is simply finding your niche.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what so much of this is, and that's what so much of narrating and auditioning is really about.
But like Ellen was saying, you'd be surprised how many people want to force that niche. They want to force themselves into a niche they shouldn't be in.
Well, I think that's mainly because they're trying to make some money out of it.
But you won't be chosen.
That's true, but they don't know that at the time. I mean, I'm curious.
Well,
Look, the thing is, when you're auditioning for any work, it's got to be something that you know you can sink your teeth into, something that you could put your heart into.
Right, and that's exactly what
If
Ellen
you
was speaking
can't
to.
do that, then yes, you're absolutely making the wrong choice. But there's some fellow over here said that he was in the military and that he finds that those kind of books are more natural for him. That's his niche. That's what he should be focusing on, not, for instance, like erotica or, you know, new adult titles. That's not what he should be auditioning for. It's what you're comfortable with. Well, that's true. You can't.
But I think. Hey now.
There are some lines I won't cross, but.
But I think what you're saying, it's like if you don't know what your niche is, it's good to have that outside feedback from being a trainer, a coach, something.
Well,
like
that's
that.
exactly
Trainer.
what I was going to say
Right.
next. I mean, looking around the room, I don't know how many of these people are formally trained. You see, I've been trained. I went to Edge Studios, studied narration, audiobooks, cartoon voices, to try to give myself a much broader skill set in order to find what, because I like science fiction, I like fantasy, where there are characters, where there are creatures, where I can take my voice and I can, you know, produce any number of people, any number of creatures. That's where I'm most comfortable with, but I would not, for example, audition for a self-help or business book.
Right.
Because I don't.
But I think the
feel that I
advice
could-
we gave was to do just what you did. You sought out some,
Right.
Edge, and went to Dave over at Edge, and you got trained, and that's what you should do. Then you're educated to make the choices and to pick the genres that are good for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Right, and we're
it's good
certainly
to-
not saying that these are the things that you should be auditioning for. I think we're just talking about what's out there and what a lot of people are auditioning for and how to figure out if these are right for you. And we've got the business and self-help at the bottom, which that man over there doesn't like, but does a lot of. I think you can learn to love it. I think you can.